Hello and welcome to another special report from Catholic Family News. I'm Brian McCall, editor-in-chief, and I'm happy to be joined today by CFN reader George Tautkus. So welcome today, George.
Thank you.
So one of the things we like to do in these programs, we interview various people. We also like to highlight different things that Catholics are out there doing, different resources that may be available. And that's why we've invited George on the program today, because he has some products, books, particularly about lives of the saints, that he's been producing for some time, and he's going to tell us a little about that. So why don't we start? We were emailing, and you told me that your idea for this whole venture came from a Catholic Family News article. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
All right. So initially, I was publishing a comic strip called Kronk that was serialized in weekly papers up and down the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
But I started kind of looking towards settling down and changing careers, and the comic, even though it was morally focused, it wasn't so much focused on the faith. So I
Mm-hmm.
figured since I didn't have to make anything that was necessarily marketable to a secular audience, I should probably give everything I had back to God. So, I'd come to tradition a few years earlier, and I'd been reading through the Catholic Family News old newspapers that my fiance and now wife used to give me. And then I was going through there's an online article in Catholic Family News about a story about St. John Bosco. And so I was inspired by that. And that was my first story in this series. And series has now lasted about 18 years. But that was the first one. That was the impetus. The second one was a story on a Chinese martyr. That was a little girl. It was a story told by Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
Mm.
And those two made my first issue. So
And about what time period is this? When did you read this and get started?
about 2005.
2005. Okay. So I think you mentioned to me, you before pursuing studies in nursing, you did a degree in graphics, which is where you obviously
Hmm.
acquired this skill set. So it's wonderful that God, provides opportunity for skills that you can share. This
Yes.
is your website or your,
Hmm.
where you mentioned Crunk, the again,
Hmm.
not secular, but the not specifically Catholic
Right.
comic strip you're working on is available, and then these Lives of the Saints. So you mentioned sort of a series. How often do you come out with one?
Annually.
Annually. Okay.
Yes.
And why?
Yeah.
So you
There was.
mentioned. Oh, good.
Oh, keep
No,
going.
go ahead. Well, you mentioned comics, and as you
So
can
it comes
see,
out annually. There were a few
yeah.
years. I skipped a few years earlier, but now it's totally annual. So.
Okay. And you mentioned comic, and as people can see from these,
Mhm.
they're. I mean, to me, I'm not an expert, but they look kind of like mid 20th century sort of comic book type um, design. So why comics? Why? What do you think? Telling these stories in this form, what's unique about it? Why is it a good medium to get this information out?
Mhm. Well, it's a very strong medium. It's both a obviously a written and a pictorial medium. And so that makes a kind of stronger medium. If you kind of look into anybody that's done studies into media, like Marshall McLuhan, who is a Catholic convert who was converted by G.K. Chesterton, or I mean, through the writings of G.K. Chesterton, he definitely said comics was a cold medium, and a cold medium meaning that you could it works almost on the same kind of terms of games or puzzles. And so
Mhm.
in that sense, it's very strong because you have both the pictorial draw and you have the written word. So both of those together make for a very strong medium. And so there's not a lot of back in the was it the 40s to the 70s. There was a comic series that came out called Treasure Chest, and that is kind of the penultimate Catholic comic because it was published for the longest time, and then ceased publication in the 70s when the winds of change were a blowing.
Right. Wow. So you called it a cold medium. What do you mean by cold?
Well, it was his definition of the term.
Okay.
Basically, the idea is that the reader fills in the gaps. So
Mm,
it's the place and the time are kind of hinted at in the backgrounds, but it's not very specific. And that was his observations of the way it looked then, which would have been like the 1940s to the 1960s or so. So it'd be
mhm.
interesting to see what he would think of it now if he were still alive.
Interesting, interesting. Well, it does sort of force you, and more than just sort of reading a text or obviously watching, fill in more. At least to me, it would seem like you have to have a more active imagination when interacting with it.
Mhm.
Is that? I mean, do you think that's fair?
Yeah,
Because you
that
do,
is
as you say,
fair. And
you
that
get these snippets. Yes.
yes. Yeah, and the reader kind of fills in the gaps. And thus,
Hmm.
so it makes the reader kind of more of an active participant as opposed to
Hmm.
kind of just a passive observer. So a more passive medium would be something like film or television where everything's filled in, you just kind of sit there and watch.
Mm. So I think you've also mentioned, in addition to these Lives of the Saints, you've done one about Our Lady of Fatima recently. Is that right?
Mhm. Yes, yes.
And
I've been working on this, book for about 7 years. It's, the most completely comics treatment of the Fatima story, I would say ever made, that I've ever seen. It's 225 pages, full colored, fully
oh,
illustrated.
wow.
So most Fatima stories, they start with, the children, and it kinda ends at the miracle of the sun, which,
Mhm.
granted is a good ending, but there's a lot of their lives that happen after that, that none of the stories that I've seen have really gone into. So, for instance,
Mm.
Jacinta and Francisco, dying of the flu, Lucia joining the Sisters St. Dorothy, and then later joining the Carmelites, her death, the consecration or the attempted consecrations and things like that. So it goes into all of that.
Interesting. So you bring it all the way up to current times, the story. That's
Yes,
excellent.
yes.
Wow. Now, some of these it seems similar. There's a little book that I've seen we used with our children. I think it was called Know Your
Mhm.
Mass, which is maybe from the 1950s
Oh,
and had
that's a good one.
little similar
Mhm.
cartoon drawings with explanations
Mhm,
about the
mhm.
mass. And I know our children,
Yes.
that and the you call it treasure box. They weren't cartoons, but the treasure box books
Mm,
are another good resource. So these are available
mm.
only through your website, or how can people purchase these books?
Yes, through my website, and I will be at the, Catholic Identity Conference too. So, coming up
And
this September 29th.
you'll have some physical books with you or to sell?
Physical books there,
Yeah.
yes, yep. And I'll be selling my books, right next to my wife, who makes, scapulars by hand. She'll be selling those.
Oh, great. Does she just brown scapulars, or what does she make?
Yeah, brown scapulars for right now. It's, Sweet Sacramentals is her
Oh,
company.
excellent, excellent. Well, and again, the website is www.tautkus studio, so Tautkus studio, all one word, .com, and I'll include that in the link. Where are you seeing orders coming from? Is it mostly the U.S. or or mostly parts of the U.S.? Where do your books seem to be ending up?
Mostly the US, but, really all around the world, but yeah, mostly the US.
So, of the various lives of the saints that you've done, do you have a particular favorite, one that's most dear to you?
I think, I really love the Fatima story. I love the Fatima children. I think second to that perhaps would be Saint Vincent Ferrer, which is not a commonly known saint, but who worked amazing miracles that not many people know about. He would stop people from falling in midair. He would just sprout wings and fly on to go give a next sermon. He lived in times much like ours, where there were there were a few people contending for the papal throne, um, and God gave him a mission. He said, "Convert more people, or I'm going to end the world now." So it made for a really great story.
Yeah, he's not always the saint that would jump first to mind in terms of maybe
Mhm.
a child story. I mean, he was interesting very much for our time, though. I mean, he was considered the saint or the prophet of the apocalypse. I mean, a
Hmm.
lot of people thought perhaps there was the world was going to end, or there's at least a really good foreshadowing of the end of the world in his time, and so he had a lot to say about kind of what to expect from the Antichrist and those end times. So again, yeah, very interesting saint. I notice you subtitle many of the books "Lives of the Saints" and "People Who Lived Saintly Lives." So what is that subtitle supposed to capture?
The idea is to it's kind of a play in words. You could play it
Yes.
forward and then reverse it. But the idea is to open up the series to people that might not have yet been canonized, but who live lives that are worthy of emulation. For instance, like a the girl in my first book, she was a little girl. She was a Chinese martyr. Um, she her priest had been locked in his rectory. The communists went in and spilled the hosts all over the floor. She hid. She came back for a number of days and
Yeah.
consumed every single host on each day before doing holy hour, and then was martyred at the end. So not canonized, but great story nonetheless, and then inspired Fulton Sheen to do a holy hour every day for the rest of his life.
Yes.
So
In addition
a
to
story
Fulton,
worth telling.
Absolutely. In addition to Fulton Sheen, I think if I remember right, that story is also in the National Catholic Reader, one of the readers we use to
Nice,
homeschool our younger children, because that there's a story about her and then a little boy, another Chinese boy martyr in that
nice.
as well. But again, here are the books. This one I think that's on the screen now is the final one in the Our Lady of Fatima
Mhm.
series. Is that right? The conclusion.
That's correct. I don't. It's the
Yes.
final in the series. I don't have the final collection printed yet, but it'll be
Mhm.
printed for the Catholic Identity Conference. But it's all you could buy them all separately, or just have it all as one edition at the Catholic Identity Conference.
Right. And yeah, this is the part four of the four-part series. And
Mhm.
again, if you're looking for resources, really very, I mean, very reasonably priced. Printing is not, as we find out, cheap these days. So again,
No.
many of these are really certainly very very affordable. Um, so anything in the future you plan to just continue producing these, or what does the future look like?
Yeah, I'll continue producing them. My next plan is for a book on Saint Mary of the Desert.
Mm.
Also kind of a little known saint, but very much a saint for our times. She was one of those people that lived a sinful life and really kind of liked her sinful life, and then eventually converted and became a great saint. Um,
Mm.
but the other series that I'm working now is actually a fictional series called Mr. Mortification, and
Yes,
the
I saw
the
that
idea
here.
is to
Yes.
have to have this kind of this the answer to like, oh, you go out there and you'll say, "Oh, this superhero is Catholic, that superhero is Catholic," things like that. It's something that exists within the medium, but what would it look like from a Catholic point of view? So it's a parody of a comic called Mister Miracle, who was a man that would who was a super escape artist. So he would escape these perilous situations, but Mister Mortification does not escape, and in fact puts himself in more perilous situations, and offers that all up. So he's a
Mm.
penitent, basically. If anybody's familiar with the term, the phenomenon of penitence, they would go through town squares kind of anonymously and do penance for the sins of the town. Very big in Italy. Um, so he kind of carries on that tradition, and amongst that, I can put in humor. You can put in slapstick. You can put in doctrine. There's scenes where it's like there's an asterisk and like see fourth Lateran Council, things like that. So something I can have a lot of fun with. It's kind of like a side project.
So yeah, if you're not happy with what Disney has done to the old Marvel comics,
Yeah,
here's an alternative for, as you say, a Catholic supernatural hero, maybe instead of a
yeah.
superhero. Right? Excellent. Well, I think in addition to the comics, you've also mentioned you do a bit with music. Can you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just kind of the kind of music I made on my own, in Richmond and stuff. I would use like children's instruments, things like that. Most recently, I put out a song that was it's called the Christ Mass song, which is basically a folk song, but it's about how secular, these Christmas songs have become.
Mm.
How, you should probably dislike me for singing the song in the first place, but the fact that you care about that just further proves my point. So it's just kind of another side project, another outlet.
Oh well, so you're not the guy that put out Richmond north of Richmond, is that?
No, no,
No,
no,
no,
no.
no.
I wish I was.
No. Actually, I saw today they were trying to twist him and say that he was a Biden supporter, and he had to come out and say,
Oh,
obviously not, which was kind of funny. But
yeah.
so tell us a little bit about. You mentioned that you saw Catholic Family News from your fiance, who's now your wife. So you obviously got married. You're traditional Catholic. Do you have some children? Tell us a little bit about your family life.
Okay. So I met my wife right around the time I started the series, well, about a year before, and then we got married within a year. We have 7 children. We homeschool, live out here in Pennsylvania, attend a fraternity parish. So yeah, our situation's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. Yeah, I was not a dyed in the wool traditionalist.
Mhm.
I grew up in the Diocese of Richmond, Virginia, which is pretty notorious. They would take all the priests in the 60s and 70s that got kicked out of their diocese. So if you think of the worst, this is where it is. This is where the
Oh,
word
wow.
clown mass is, and
Wow.
priests riding motorcycles down aisles and stuff. So, but it was because of that liturgical abuse that my mother was a widow, and she wanted to raise us right. So, she was tired of liturgical abuse. She honestly just wanted the Novus Ordo where they would, do the what say the black and do the red, but that
Mm.
was nearly impossible. So she went to the Latin Mass because she said I was just sick of liturgical abuse, and that's it. Which is, it's kind of a roundabout way of getting people to go to Latin Mass. They get a lot of attendees at
Mhm.
the church in Chesapeake because of that, because people are just tired of the abuse.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting.
anyway,
Yeah.
I
A
was
lot
not
of people.
dyed in the wool, but
Right.
when I met my wife, she started, kind of. I read the Jesuits, and then I read the Pope Saint Pius X's encyclical on modernism, and then Pius IX's syllabus of errors. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the syllabus of errors, it's hard to even figure out, like, are they saying this is what's okay and what's not okay? Because that's how bad catechesis has become. So when you realize all this stuff is not okay, then you say to yourself, I must change the way that I live.
Mm. And it's very true. It's interesting people's paths to. I mean, there's very few people now who are whatever you could die in the wool or original traditionalists. I mean, many.
Mm,
It's grown so much since the initial band of those. So everyone has their kind of own route, and what different things lead different people to it is always interesting. But who knows? Maybe you could do a little comic strip illustration of the syllabus of errors, explaining
oh, that'd be an idea.
each little pictorial representation of each of the
Hmm,
errors. Well,
yeah,
excellent. Well, good luck at the Catholic Identity Conference as well, meeting
thank you.
people. If any of our viewers are going to be there, again, certainly we'd encourage you to look for George. Again, if you're not going to be there, though, here is his website, right, which is tautkusstudio.com, and I'll put that link in there in the video below. But thank you again. This is so much more. As Michael Davies always used to say, the men of the Western uprising in England always used to say, it's the mass that matters. But
Mhm,
you go on to explain, but it's more than the mass. Once you get the mass, you realize the mass is this sort of nexus that pulls all of these things, doctrine and but even culture and art and things together, and it sort of is the linchpin that holds them all together. And so we really do need people like yourself to take over and all of these areas, whether it's Dr. Kwasniewski with music or, as you said, comic strips is something that Catholics need to sort of reappropriate back to build the culture. Because if you just bring your children to mass and okay, we're going to sit in mass for an hour and now you're done, it's not that's not really sowing seeds for a lifetime of Catholicism. So thank you for
yeah,
your contribution towards that effort.
yeah. Thank you for having me on your show.
Great. Thank you. And for all of you joining, if you've enjoyed this, in addition to supporting George and his work and his resources, please help us by forwarding this video, liking it, subscribing to our various audio and video podcast channels, and as always, considering a subscription to Catholic Family News. Who knows, just like George, you could read an article. We have an article on St. John Eudes and last month that might inspire you with an idea like this of a particular apostolate or a calling God may have for you. So, as these issues go out each month, you never know what they'll bring about. So maybe his story will inspire you to subscribe. You can follow the link or call the 800 number at the end of this video. So, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time, and may God bless you.